Bismillah, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, wa ala. Just if someone, if someone does not get the documents, because we send these files by email, so in, the station of Faqr, if someone is not getting the documents, please reach out to Abu Ayyub and give him your email. Or write it down and pass it on to him. Because also after this, in Fiqh of Transactions, you will be getting the Fiqh, because Fiqh of Transactions was not published yet, so you will be getting a PDF file of every chapter on a weekly basis, inshallah. So Imam Qudamah rahimahullah ta'ala in his book al-Umdat says here in this chapter under the book of Zakah, Bab Zakat al-Kharij min al-Ard, or the chapter on the Zakah of that which comes out of the earth or comes out of the land. And basically what comes out of the earth or the land is three things that come out of the earth or the land. One of them is plants, crops. The other one is what? Metals, mined metals. And the third one is treasure troves, if you ever come across them. So these are the three things. We will talk about asal, we will talk about what comes out of the sea and some of the controversial issues. But the three that are agreed upon, crops, mined metals, and treasure troves. Sheikh rahimahullah ta'ala said, وَهُوَ نَوْعَانَ أَحَدُهُمَا النَّبَاتِ. There are two types. First, plants, because he would consider treasure troves and mined metals to be together one type. أَحَدُهُمَا النَّبَاتِ, first, plants. He says, فَتَجِبُ الزَّكَاةُ مِنْهُ فِي كُلِّ حَبٍّ وَثَمَرٍ يُكَالُ وَيُدَّخَرُ إذا خرج من أرضه وبلغ 5 أوسق لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس في حب ولا ثمر, most of the narrations ولا تمر, صدقة حتى يبلغ 5 أوسق. Zakat is obligatory on plants for all grain and fruit that can be measured. Measured here means measured by volume. Measured by volume, not by weight. Measured by volume. Yukal is different from yuzan. Kail is different from wazn. Kail is to measure by volume. Wazn is to measure by weight. However, we're doing the measurements by weights so that they could be standardized, they're easier, and they could be basically translated into different measures in different countries that use weights, not a volume, to measure things. You know the difference between 1 liter and 1 kilogram? 1 liter is a measure of volume. 1 gallon is a measure of volume or weight? Volume. Liter, gallon versus kilogram, pound, ounce. Okay. So he says, Zakat then is mandatory on every grain and fruit that can be measured by volume and stored. If it comes out of his land, if it is produced from the land and reaches 5 awsuq, which is a different type of measure. This is based on the narration of the Prophet ﷺ. There is no charity on grain or fruit until it reaches 5 awsuq, and in most narrations, no charity on grain or dates until it reaches 5 awsuq. And we will talk about al-wasq or wisq, which is that measure. Now, the first thing that we want to talk about here is, so which plants are zakatable? Which plants are zakatable? And here, I have my own little inclinations. I'll, veer away from my madhab a little bit because I have sort of like new realizations. The the issue, the difference between Imam Abu Hanifa and the Jumhur in this regard, and you could say that the split is between Imam Abu Hanifa and the Jumhur, because the Jumhur, despite the fact that they disagree among themselves on what is exactly zakatable, they agree on the concept that certain things are not zakatable, particularly fresh fruits and vegetables. The Jumhur, the Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis, they don't consider fresh fruits and vegetables zakatable. The Malikis made a list of 20 things that are zakatable. The Shafi'is, they say that anything that is non-perishable, but staples of food that are not perishable. And these particular differences will come back when we talk about riba and when we talk about other issues as well. But the Malikis said, they mentioned, they gave a list of things that are not zakatable. The Shafi'is, they said if these are food staples and they are non-perishable, then they are zakatable. The Hanbali said not necessarily food, but what matters here is yukal wa yudakhar. It is measured by volume, and it is non-perishable plants or non-perishable produce, although produce is usually used for perishable things, but it does not necessarily mean that. But non-perishable produce that is not that non-perishable produce that can be stored and measured by volume, these are zakatable. And then they will give you a list of what is zakatable and what's not zakatable. So olives. According to the madhab, olives are not zakatable because even though you store them, they're not usually, it is not usual for them to be stored for long periods of time. And what they agree on, and that's something that you need to always start with the points of agreement, and then work out from that consensus. Sometimes the consensus is in the middle, sometimes, or consensus sometimes is like on the two extremes, and then you work your way through the differences, but start from where they agreed. Where did they agree? They agreed on the 4 basic things that they must agree on. When the Prophet ﷺ sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari to al-Yaman, he said to them, لا تأخذوا الصدقة إلا من هذه الأربعة الحنطة والشعير والتمر والزبيب. Don't take charity, sadaqah, meaning zakat here. Don't take zakat except from these 4 things. Barley, wheat, barley, dates, and raisins. Wheat, barley, dates, and raisins. So that's what the 4 things that they had to agree on. Most of them, vast majority of them, added corn to this because it's pretty much like them. But this is the point of agreement between the scholars. And then they disagreed about other things. And some extended them to like 20 items, some to more, some gave like particular prerequisites for something to be zakatable. Imam Abu Hanifa said any produce that comes out of the land that has some benefit, that was basically planted by humans for their benefits, whatever benefits, food, whatever benefits. Whenever you plant anything in the land, and then you harvest it or you pick it for their benefits, then that is zakatable to Imam Abu Hanifa. That is zakatable to Imam Abu Hanifa. So why did they disagree? Why did Imam Abu Hanifa say this? And why did they say that there is no zakat in fresh fruits and vegetables? Okay, that's a big discussion. And I am trying to tell myself now, to exhort myself and admonish myself to not waste the whole hour on this discussion, because it has the potential of basically consuming the next 1 hour. But the bottom line is, we have certain reports. We have a report, for instance, that is of controversial authenticity, where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Laysa fil khudrawati sadaqa." There is no charity, there is no zakat binding on khudrawat, vegetables. That's fresh vegetables. And then we also have this hadith which is this was controversial. This is a clear statement, but this is controversial in terms of authenticity, in terms of transmission. But then we have the other hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said to Mu'adh ibn Jabal and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, don't take the zakah except from these 4 types. But then this one is clearer. It's more explicit, you know. No, I'm sorry. This one is more authentic, but this one is called waqa'at ayn, right? It is a particular incident. It is a particular incident that may have, we call it يتطرقها الاحتمال, which means that there may be some other reason why the Prophet ﷺ said this. Maybe some other reason why he said to Mu'adh ibn Jabal and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, don't take the charity except from those four things. It is unlike a statement. It is unlike a statement that has, like, you know, subject and predicate and clear statement. لَيْسَ فِي الْخُضْرَوَاتِ صَدَقَةٌ. If the Prophet, if this is traceable to the Prophet ﷺ, then the Jumhur will have, you know, just a clear evidence on their side, no discussion after that. But this one is weak in transmission. And if you don't accept the transmission of this one, then there is room to basically talk about the implications of his command to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari and Mu'adh ibn Jabal, to say that يتطرقها الاحتمال. There are possibilities here that the Prophet ﷺ did not want to collect the zakah from those particular, from other than those four particular items for some other reason. That had to do with Yemen, that had to do with, which is the place, Yemen, that had to do with the times, And the Sahaba, radwanullahi alayhim, the reports that come from the Sahaba, radwanullahi alayhim, about not taking zakat from khudrawat, are also in line with his statement to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. But is it a particular incident that could have some basically other explanation other than being a divine maxim, no charity to be taken from any produce other than those four? Keep in mind, even the Maliki, Shafi'is, or Hanbalis, they did not limit them to those four. By qiyas or analogy, they extended this to other things that to them seemed like those four. And they tried to brainstorm on what would be like the four types. And then the Hanbalis said that we see here a thread that connects all of those things. They are all measured by volume. They can all be stored. They're non-perishable. The Shafi'is said they're all staples of food. And the Malikis basically enumerated the different types of, although in other places the Malikis also give descriptions. But then Imam Abu Hanifa and contemporary scholars, at least contemporary scholars, will say, if we don't have that statement, that predicated statement, لَيْسَ فِي الْخُضْرَوَاتِ صَدَقَةٌ, from the Prophet ﷺ, if that is not traceable to the Prophet ﷺ, then we have basically the Prophet ﷺ could have been acting in his executive capacity. And that's like a can of worms, for sure. But then that is also why ijtihad should be left for the greatest of all times, because certain things, if we abuse them, certain concepts or certain principles, if we abuse them, we can certainly walk away from the deen. So when would the Prophet ﷺ be acting in his prophetic capacity versus his executive capacity versus his capacity as a judge, judicial capacity? Imam al-Qarafi talks about this, and it has been accepted ever since the time of Imam al-Qarafi that not that the concept itself did not exist before Imam al-Qarafi, but he's the one who formulated it. And it has been accepted thereafter by most of the usulis. Yes, the Prophet ﷺ does sometimes act in his judicial capacity or capacity as a judge, and sometimes acts in his executive capacity or the capacity as a hakim. And that's why he said, and if you basically, if you're manipulative in your presentation of your case, you may deceive me, and I may give you something that does not belong to you, and if I do, then I am giving you a hot piece of coal from the hellfire. Take it or leave it. So he's clearly saying here, sometimes I act in my capacity as a judge. And in this case, you could deceive me. If I'm acting in my capacity as a prophet, you can't deceive me. But if I act in my capacity as a judge, you can't deceive me. So was the Prophet ﷺ, when he said this to Mu'adh ibn Jabal, acting in his executive capacity? And these were particular circumstances because of Yemen or because of, the times. And these things could change with time. Some of the contemporary scholars would say that. They would say that Imam Abu Hanifa's position seems to be more conducive to equity and to attaining the objectives of the Sharia. Because why are we making a distinction? Because nowadays things could be easily stored, things could be easily moved around. And if this particular, we may say that the Prophet ﷺ wanted to encourage people to plant fruits and vegetables because this is Arabia. These things are very hard to keep to store. And if we also impose zakat on them, or if we take zakat from them, that will be further discouraging of people from planting those fruits and vegetables that the people need. So it was a way, and the zakat, the system of zakat, does actually pay attention to this, to these ends or goals, to basically encourage particular economical endeavors and discourage particular economical attitudes. So the system of zakat does take this in consideration. So did the Prophet ﷺ say this to encourage people to basically grow fruits and vegetables? Some of the contemporary scholars say this, and they say since things are different nowadays, and since certain crops that are perishable could be a lot more profitable than crops that are non-perishable, then it's more conducive to equity that we take the zakah from everything. From everything, like Imam Abu Hanifa said. I didn't say any of that, right? Because in the Hanbali madhab, you don't take zakat from fruits and vegetables. But anyway, that is the discussion. Clear? Okay. Next, the other issue after what should we take zakat from, the other issue is the issue of nisab. And then he said, if it reaches 5 awsuq. And then he goes on to explaining what wasq is in terms of sa'as and in terms of, different types of measures. He was from Damascus. He lived in Damascus. He was Maqdisi. That's why he's Ibn Qudamah al-Maqdisi. He was from Jerusalem, may Allah liberate it. And then he moved to Damascus. So certainly, obviously, he will give you the Messine measures. But for the sake of brevity and for the sake of practicality, it's 653 kilograms. 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds. You figure it out. Multiply by 2.2, you get them in pounds. But 653, the 5 awsuq wasq, is 60 sa's. 1 sa' is 4 muds. 1 mud is the fill of your 2 hands. Fill of your 2 hands. Multiply this by 4, it becomes a sa'. Multiply the 60 by 60, it becomes a wasq. Some people say wasaq. It is, you could, anyway. It's easier to say wasaq, but it's wasq. So 60 sa's, wasq is 60 sa's. Every sa' is about what? So you have, so 5 times 60 is 300. There is some fraction here that's a little bit controversial. What is it? 2 point what kilograms? 1 sa'. The fraction is controversial. But anyway, 5 times 60 is 300, times 2 is 600, and the 53 came from this fraction that's a little controversial. About 2.2, 2.1 something. Anyway, 653 kilograms is the neighborhood. It is completely impossible to be completely exact about it. That is why a little bit of a difference, you should be cautious with a little bit of a difference. Like 652.5 or something. Okay, so that is the nisab, which is the zakatable threshold, which is the zakatable minimum. That is the zakatable threshold, the zakatable minimum. Then the Sheikh said, وَيَجِبُ الْعُشْرُ rates now. We will talk about the rates of zakat here. وَيَجِبُ الْعُشْرُ فِيمَا سُقِيَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالسُّيُوحِ ونصف العشر فيما سقي بكلفة كالدوالي والنواضح. The zakat that must be paid is 10% for that, for what has been watered by rain or water sources that flow to the land without effort, and 5% for what has been irrigated with effort, such as bringing water by irrigation equipment or on the backs of camels or other beasts of burden. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, فِيمَا سَقَتِ السَّمَاءَ الْعُشْرُ وَفِيمَا سُقِيَ بِالنَّضْحِ نِصْفُ الْعُشْرُ. فيما سقط السماء أو العيون أو كان عثريا العشر وسقي بالنضح نصف العشر. Whatever is irrigated by rain, by water that flows from springs or through the roots. It has deep roots that gets the water from the ground, from the groundwater. That's the astra. Astra is the one that drinks the water through its roots. So all of this stuff that does not require great effort, that does not require expenses, keep in mind, non-annual expenses, non-recurrent expenses are not considered expenses. So if you make channels to get the water to your land, that is not considered a recurrent expense. So if those channels, you make them one time and then they work for the rest of your life, you pay 10%, not 5%. The expenses that are meant here are the recurrent expenses with every crop. So with every year, the recurrent expenses. So every time you irrigate the land, you need to use equipment, you need to use beasts of burden to carry the water to the land and to sprinkle the water in the land. But if this is a one-time expense, it is not considered an expense that will exempt you from the 10% and lower your rates from 10% to 5%. If you encounter if you have recurrent expenses, then your zakat will drop from 10% to 5%. Keep in mind, truly, like, when I talk to you about the Fiqh of inheritance, and I'll mention, so someone was talking about the Fiqh of inheritance in Islam and the perfection and the completeness of the Fiqh of inheritance in Islam, and it's a law professor from the UK from 19th century. He was writing about Muhammadan laws of inheritance, and he said that this is something to marvel at, not only if you're a practicing lawyer, but just for your intellectual enjoyment. Just to look at the system of inheritance that is the most perfect, most refined that we ever received from ancient times, from antiquity. But it's just not limited to this. You see, all the laws, within 13 years of the prophetic mission in Medina, all of those laws have been put together and communicated to the or to the society. That is miraculous. That is truly miraculous. We can come back just volume-wise. Forget about, what this professor said about the perfection and about the beauty and about the intellectual splendor and all of that stuff. Volume-wise is miraculous. Can you imagine one man within 13 years to put together laws about everything, and hand them over to the next generations of his ummah? That is in and of itself miraculous. Volume-wise, without even paying attention to the quality or their perfection. So the Prophet ﷺ wanted to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted by this legislation, by making two different rates for the zakat, to recognize that there are different expenses. Certainly, you're not going to be tailored this to individuals because no laws do this. And the law that tailors to individuals is not a law to begin with. You can't make the laws that are customizable to individuals. But the laws will have to recognize to as much as possible the differences between people in different circumstances, different variables. And here the law recognizes that, agricultural endeavors are not all the same when it comes to expenses and when it comes to effort. Okay, so 10% and 5%. What about if it is half of the year and half of the year? Half of the year you irrigate by rain, and half of the year you need to get the water to your land by equipment or by beasts of burden. What do you do? 7.5%, yes. But what about if it is like 8 months and 4 months? Or not 8 months, it's the season, like 60% of the season, you're irrigating by rain, 40% of the season you're irrigating by whatever is, whatever will contribute more to the growth of the plants, أنفع, أنمى, so أكثر نماءً. Whatever will contribute more to the growth of the plants, you will be considered of this side, 10% or 5%. If it is not like half and half, but like 80-20, whatever will grow, it's not about time. It's about the effect on the growth of the plants. Then the Sheikh said, وَإِذَا بَدَى الصَّلَاحُ فِي التَّمْرِ or في الثمر واشتد الحب ووجبت الزكاة. Zakat becomes obligatory when the fruit appears ripe and the grain has matured. Ripe is variable. Ripe means ready to be consumed. And ready to be consumed, sometimes in certain types of produce, it is about the color, and certain types of produce, it's about the consistency, in certain types of produce, it's about the taste. So whenever they're ready for use, that is what this means. And that is when the zakah becomes obligatory. What does it mean the zakat becomes obligatory? So what do we mean by this? The stuff now is still in the field. You can imagine that this would be what, corn? Okay. The corn now is still in the field. That doesn't look like corn. Corn. So you can imagine that this is still now in the field, but it's ready to be consumed. Ready to be consumed. Okay, zakah is now obligatory. Wajabat. Wajabat means what? It becomes now binding. But it does not become finally binding in the Hanbali madhab until you take it to the silos. Or you take it to their storage places. You move them to storage places. What about from here to there? Why do we have two different times? Binding when they are ripe, finally established the obligation of zakah when you take them here. So what about someone who lost his crops here by negligence? Like a negligent farmer who lost all the crops here. Or by like a natural calamity beyond his control. Before they became ripe. Before they became ripe. How much zakah does he need to pay? Nothing, because zakah did not become binding yet. Zakah did not become binding yet. Now this became ripe, ready to be used. ready to be used, ripe, ready to be used or consumed. And now, because of your negligence, or because of just like whatever, recklessness, anything, you lost your crops. How much is zakat? You'll have to pay zakat.
Even if you lose it to a hailstorm?
No. I said negligence or recklessness. Negligence or recklessness. Okay. What about if you're negligent or reckless here after you took the stuff to your silos? You're negligent or reckless and you lost your crops. Well, obviously, if you're liable here, then you must be liable there as well, because this is now finally established. Okay. The difference here is, what about if a calamity befalls your crops calamity befalls your crops here, nothing is binding on you. Calamity befalls your crops here after they're ripe. The calamity befalls the crops before harvesting or picking and before taking them to their storage place, nothing is binding on you. No zakat. Calamity befalls your crops here, you have to pay zakat, because zakat now became finally established. You should have given it out to the poor immediately. Any delay, you're responsible. Finally established here. When they reached your storage places, your silos, the zakat has become finally established. You lose them after getting to your silos. For any reason, you have to pay the zakat. It's a debt that you owe to Allah. Okay. So that is the thing about the obligation of zakah and how it is two-tiered in the Hanbali madhab when they are ripe and after you take them to the storage place. And then the Shaykh said, وَلَا يُخْرِجُ الْحَبَّ إِلَّا مُصَفَّى وَلَا الثَّمَرَ إِلَّا يَابِسًا. One does not set the grain aside as payment until it has been threshed. And likewise, the qishra, what is the qishra? Huh? The peel or something. Not every peel, but the removable peel. Whatever is threshed, the grains have to be threshed before you give the zakat out. And the fruits also have to be dried. So you give the zakat out in the form of, you give the zakat out because you don't give this. Why is this? Because you don't give the zakat to the poor people and they have to do the work for you. You have to do the threshing, they have to do the drying. Because if you give them ripe dates, for instance, you give them ripe dates, what are you going to do with ripe dates? They have to eat all the stuff now. But if you dry them, or you dry the grapes, make them raisins, then the poor people can keep the stuff for months or without needing to do it themselves. So you need to basically give the zakat out, deliver the zakat to the poor people in a form that would suit their needs, be storable stuff. There are certain nuances here. What if you sell the crop before you harvest it? You already sold it. Can you give? And there are the other scenario also when you have certain types of grapes that don't become raisins, don't turn into raisins, for instance. What do you do with those? So in the Hanbali madhab, all the time you will have to give dates, dry dates or dry raisins, according to the authorized position. According to a less popular position chosen by Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, if you sold it, you can give 10% of the price that you collected. And you don't have to go out of your way to buy dates. And if the raisins do not turn, if the grapes don't turn into raisins, you could give the zakat out in the form of grapes. Because this is whatever I have. This is my crop. This is whatever I produced. It doesn't turn into raisins. So I will give 10% of it in zakat in the form of grapes. Then he said, ولا زكاة فيما يكسبه من مباح الحب والثمر ولا في اللقات أو اللقات that we talked about earlier. ولا ما يأخذه أجرة لحصاده. There is no zakat on what one collects of the permissible for public use, grains or fruit that grows in the wild without cultivation, or items that have been found or picked up, or wages for harvesting. All of this is dependent on the time of obligation. The time of obligation is here. This became ripe. Now, whoever owns at this time, whoever owns the crops at this time, when the obligation became binding, is the one who's responsible to pay the zakat. Now, after they harvest the crops, if someone collects the grains on the ground and collects a lot more than 5 awsuq off the ground, more than 5 awsuq off the ground, no zakat on this person. Because the zakat has become obligatory here, but became binding here. So whoever owns at this time is the only one responsible for zakat. Afterwards, you're not responsible for zakat. Also, if you help in the harvesting, and the landowner tells you, I will give you, in exchange for your effort, I will give you 6 awsuq, which is more than the nisab. Do you pay zakat on that? No, because only the owner of the crops at the time the crops became ripe, ready for consumption, is the one who will have to pay zakat. Then the Sheikh said, وَلَا يُضَمُّ صِنْفٌ مِنَ الْحَبِّ وَالثَّمَرِ إِلَى غَيْرِهِ فِي تَكْمِيلِ النِّصَابِ فإن كان صنفا واحدا مختلف الأنواع كالتمور ففيه الزكاة. تمور مختلفة. One kind of grain or fruit does not get added to another to complete a nisab. However, if there is one kind that has different varieties, like the various sorts of dates, there would be zakat on it. And that's the sort of the concept of the genre and the species and the Frenchia and stuff. So if it is one jins, but different types within the same jins, like different types of dates, you add them up, and if they are in their entirety more than 5 awsuq, you give the zakat. But if you split your land up between different types of crops, and you have 4 awsuq of dates, 4 awsuq of grapes, 4 awsuq of corn, 4 awsuq of barley, do you give the zakat because you have 16 awsuq? No, you don't. Because every type has its own different nisab. Every jins has its own different nisab. So, and then he said, ويخرج من كل نوع زكاته وإن أخرج جيدا عن الرديء جاز وله أجره. One must pay zakat from each kind. If one pays a good kind as zakat for a bad kind, it is permissible, but not vice versa. And one would deserve a reward from Allah, like a reward in the hereafter. So you have different types of dates, and you have like 4 awsuq of this type of dates, 3 awsuq of that type of dates, 2 awsuq of that type of dates, and he said it is preferable that you give 10% of the 4 awsuq of type A, 10% of the 3 awsuq of type B, and 10% of the 2 awsuq of type C. However, if that's too much of a hassle for you, give whatever you need to give, 10% of the total out of one type. However, that type cannot be the bad type. It has to be the good type if you must do this, and then you get a reward from Allah. I mean, if you wanted to do it fairly and you want to do it equitably, completely, that's fine. It's up to you. 10% of this, 10% of that, 10% of that. But if you want to give, this is too much of a hassle, and you want to give out of one type, it's obvious that Allah said, وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ تُنْفِقُونَ وَلَسْتُمْ بِآخِذِيهِ إِلَّا أَن تُغْمِضُوا فِيهِ. That you don't give out of your bad crops for charity. You give the poor, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You know, you will not have birr or righteousness, virtue, until you spend out of that which you love, out of that which you value. Okay, now we're done with the zakat of plants. Next, the Sheikh is talking about ma'adin or metals, mined metals. النوع الثاني المعدن. Ma'adin, you know, جنات وعدن is what? Means, عدن here means what? Stability, establishment, settlement. It's a place of settlement. So, ma'adin is called ma'adin because it settles in the ground. It is settled, established in the ground. That is why it's called ma'adin. Is it necessarily a metal or not? That is what we will discuss here. The Sheikh said, فمن استخرج من معدن نصابا من الذهب أو الفضة أو ما قيمته ذلك من الجواهر أو الكحل أو الصفر أو الحديد أو غيره فعليه الزكاة. Whoever extracts a nisab of metal, of gold or silver, or a value equal to this nisab in precious metals such as coal, copper, kuhl, which is antimony, you know, and iron, must pay zakat on it. Must pay zakat on it. The Malikis and the Shafi'is said only gold and silver. The Hanafis took a step further than them and said all impressionable metals that can be cast. Impressionable metals that can be cast. The Hanbalis went out all the way and said everything that comes out of the land that does not belong to the usual nature of the land, not sand, not rocks, you know, anything that is in the land that does not belong to the surrounding land, sort of the natural sort of substance of the land, is zakatable. Whether it is gold or silver, or impressionable metals, or even liquid stuff, anything valuable that comes out of the land, you pay zakat on it. Don't you love the Hanbalis? That really is also like a maqasidi type of understanding. So anything that has value, there is no reason to make a distinction between something and something that is more profitable. You know, between something that just because it is impressionable or not impressionable, or just because it's gold and silver. What if it is more profitable? Because if the Prophet is the one who made the distinction, we say sami'na wa ata'na. If the Prophet did not make the distinction, then we use our reasoning here. Logical reasoning is really, really, really important. Just have to understand this. Because once you give up your reason, you've just given up too much. You will be a loser. Okay. It is, so then you understand this disagreement, right? So anyone who owns who extracts anything from the land that does not belong to the land will have. But these are private entities, because when we talked about who is liable to pay zakat, we said private entities, you know, individuals are liable to pay zakat. And then the Sheikh said, وَلَا يُخْرِجُ إِلَّا بَعْدَ السَّبْكِ وَالتَّصْفِيَةِ. The zakat is not to be paid until after it has been cast and refined. Because again, you don't give the poor people stuff that you just got out of the land and has not been, you know, they don't know what to do with it. So, بعد السبك والتصفية. you estimate that this is the amount that needs to be given out. ولا شيء في اللؤلؤ والمرجان والعنبر والسمك ولا شيء في من صيد البر والبحر ولا في شيء من صيد البر والبحر. There is no zakat on pearls, coral, amber, or fish, or on what is hunted on the land or fished from the sea. There is another report in the Hanbali Madhab which we may also like, and that is like Abu Yusuf's report that would make zakat binding on amber, coral, whatever treasures that come out of the sea, they are still zakatable. You could say that, they're not zakatable because there is nothing that came from the Prophet ﷺ about them, but what's the difference between sea and land? You could say that sea requires a lot of mukhatara, risk-taking, and then the reason why it is exempt from zakah according to the four madhahib, authorized view of the four madhahib, is that the precious metals and stones that come out of the sea are not zakatable. But it is one report in the Hanbali madhab that is not the authorized view, and it is the position of Imam Abu Yusuf, the disciple of Imam Abu Hanifa. So, anyway, some controversy here. But every side could try to support their position with rational reasoning. But certainly, like whatever you hunt is not, any fish is not zakatable. And then, finally, is that clear now? Keep in mind that Imam Abu Hanifa considers because we didn't talk here about the nisab. He said the nisab. Nisab is what? Nisab is equal to the nisab of gold and silver. So if the value of the metals that you extracted from the land, in one attempt, or from one irq in one attempt, without disruption, is equal to 85 grams of gold, that is zakatable, according to the Hanbalis. According to the Hanafis, it is zakatable whether or not it reaches 85 grams of gold. What if you get an amount that is equal to 70 grams of gold out of the land? The Hanafis will tell you zakatable. And the Hanafis will tell you 20% also, not 2.5%. Hanbalis, 2.5%, just like the Malikis and Shafi'is. Because they say it is just like gold and silver. If gold and silver are usually 2.5%, metals are like gold and silver, and so. But the Hanafis say no, this is just coming out of the land. You will pay 20% now, and if you keep the gold and silver next year, you'll pay the 2.5%. But since it just came out of the land, it is 20%. Why? Because their understanding of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ of rikaz al-khumus, rikaz meaning treasure troves, to the Jumhur, it means to the Hanafis anything that comes out of the land. Any valuable thing that comes out of the land. Then khumus, which means 20% is binding. So the Hanafis took this to mean that anything that comes out of the land, not just treasure troves, but also mined metals. The Jumhur said no, mined metals are not like treasure troves. Treasure troves is someone is looking for stuff and then you dig a little bit and you find like a treasure, so 20%. But mined metals requires a lot of effort, requires a lot of work to mine those metals. Then the zakat binding on them is 2.5% to encourage those economical endeavors, searching for metals and stuff like that. And then the Sheikh said, وَفِي الرِّكَازِ الْخُمُسِ أي نوع كان من المال قل أو كثر ومصرفه مصرف الفيء وباقيه لواجده. The zakat on buried treasures from the pre-Islamic period of ignorance is 1/5 of what is found, regardless of what kind of property it is, whether it is small or large in amount. Its recipients are the same as the recipients of the war booty gained without fighting, al-fay, war booty gained without fighting. And the rest belongs to the one who finds it. So the Masraf al-Fay is everything. Fi sabilillah. It's everything in the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you could build bridges, do anything from Masraf al-Fay. But first, what is a rikaz? The Prophet ﷺ was approached by a man who found the treasure, and the Prophet ﷺ said to him, ما وجدته في قرية مسكونة فعرفه وما وجدته في قرية غير مسكونة ففيه وفي الركاز الخمس. Whatever you find in a land that is inhabited, then announce it. Announce it. And we will talk about this in the section of financial transactions, Fiqh of Financial Transactions, in detail, because there is a chapter for luqata in the Fiqh of Financial Transactions. For now, we will not talk about this in detail, but it has to be announced for a year before you acquire it, before it becomes yours. But even if the rightful owner showed up later, you will still have to pay him. But the Prophet said to him, if you find it in a land that is inhabited, if you find it in town, then you announce it. And if you find it in a land that is not inhabited. But the scholars also added that it has to indicate, it has to show that this is a treasure from the time of Jahiliyyah. Treasure from the, if it has any indication that this is from the time of Islam, it has to be announced because it is, you'll find somebody who owns it, who will claim it. So if you find the treasure trove, then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَفِيهِ وَفِي الرِّكَازِ الْخُمُسِ, then 20%, 1/5, which is 20%, is binding in it. The Hanbalis agreed here that there is no nisab, there is no minimum, there is no zakat threshold. Only time when there is no nisab in the Hanbali madhab is what? The only time when there is no nisab in the Hanbali madhab is what? Treasure troves. And the Hanafis, they also add to this mined metals. But in the Hanbali madhab, the only time is treasure troves, because they figure, let's say you're playing in the sand and you found like 60 grams of gold. The 20% goes to charity. Because to show gratitude, it's a minna from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're just playing in the sand. And so that is why they don't require a nisab for this. And that is why the zakat rates are extremely high. 20% will have to go to charity here. And that's it. I guess we're done with this. And next time, inshallah, we will have the zakat of al-naqdain and the zakat of currency, which may be more practical sort of use for you.